Hey, what is up? Welcome to this episode of the Wantrepreneur to Entrepreneur podcast. As always, I'm your host, Brian Lofrumento, and today's episode is one that I've had circled on my calendar for a long time because we are joined by an incredible entrepreneur and business leader. He's a fellow podcaster, a fellow author. He has not only an incredible life journey and business journey, but this guy understands business strategy at such a deep level. We are all going to learn so much from him here today. So let me tell you about today's guest. His name is Carl J Cox. He's the CEO and founder of 40 Strategy. Through his career, Carl has been an executive leader and board member with 7 different organizations who have grown 2x to 7x with operations in 4 continents. He's the host of the Measure Success podcast, where he talks with top leaders about effective strategies that inspire success in business as well as their personal life. Carl is the author. I love his book title. He is the author of a book called Lost at Sea, an entrepreneur's guide to strategy. There's so much that he's going to reveal to us, including his captain framework today that really gives us a guiding star as to where our strategy needs to go, the direction that our business is going. He grew up in poverty, no advantage starting out. That's a key part to his story that for me, as someone who's listened to so many entrepreneur stories, that's something that I relate to. So I love so much about Carl's story. So without any further ado, let's dive straight into my interview today with Carl J Cox. All right, Carl, I am so excited that you are here. Welcome to the show.
Brian, thank you so much for having me be a guest.
Heck yeah. And I'm going to be honest. I know that you know your bio way better than any of us do, but I'm going to be honest with listeners that I could have kept going. There's so much more that I didn't say about you, things that I really admire, like your company donates 10% of your revenues to nonprofits. But take us beyond the bio. That's just a little bit of a tease. Tell us, who is Carl? How did you end up here?
Well, it's a big question. We'll keep the short end of it. And the key part of, I've been really fortunate throughout my career to say yes. And through those opportunities of saying, yes, I'm going to try something new, I'm going to try something different, I've been in so many different situations. I started out my career as a bean counter for the first 10 years of my career. And for many, you get stuck. You think, I'm just going to be a CFO for the rest of my life, which isn't a bad thing, by the way. I was really fortunate by 30 years old to be a CFO. But there was a point when somebody said, would you like to try to do something different? And I said, yes. And it was something I'd never done before. I was managing IT. And then from IT, they said, well, would you like to perhaps manage something else? We'd like to manage our product tech support. And I was like, okay, let's give that a shot. And then from that point forward, we took the next step. And they're like, could you set up a distribution center in Europe? And I was like, okay, let's give it a shot. From those different experiences, I just kept on growing throughout my career saying, yes, let's give it a try. And that's what led me ultimately to today. I mean, there's more to that part of the story, but I think what I've been fortunate with is having the courage to say yes, even though I didn't know exactly what was ahead of me.
Yeah, I love that overview for so many reasons. The first of which that I want to call out for listeners, which is something that's true of so many entrepreneurial journeys, is that those yeses brought you from seemingly random. It's not random when you look through the rearview mirror, but now we can see how all of those pieces of the puzzle that you were exposed to give you such an incredible vantage point when it comes to overarching business strategy. And so I love what you do with your company. We're obviously going to talk about your company a lot in today's episode, but at 40 Strategy, something that you guys focus on from startup to $40 million and beyond. That's a huge focal area, Carl. And obviously at the root of it is strategy. How do we even start talking about strategy? Because let's face it, most people, they don't have a strategy.
They don't. And, I think it's important for your listeners to understand, I was 30 years old as CFO and I didn't understand strategy. So I was very, very fortunate to have a level 5. If you're familiar with the concept of servant-based leadership, Jerry Ramer is CEO of Lightspeed. That was that company I was just mentioning where I said yes to a bunch of different opportunities. But he would pull me aside from time to time and say, Carl, we need to talk strategy about that. And I honestly didn't know what he meant. And then I finally started to learn strategy is just a big word that says how you're going to get from A to B, which means you have to change your habits, perhaps your people, perhaps your systems. You have to change how you're going to get to somewhere to get to a new destination. And that's the key of what strategy is defining, writing down, and clarifying how you're going to find your map to your new location.
Yeah, which obviously alludes to the fact that we also need to have an inherent understanding of where we are, what's that point A, and of course, that point B, where the heck do we want to go? And Carl, that's, I'm sure so much of our conversation today is going to be about plugging that gap of what's in between that point A and point B. One marketing campaign that has stuck with me my entire life, I'm here in my 30s now, but as a child, I always remember those Reese's commercials where Reese's peanut butter cups, they always said there's no wrong way to eat a Reese's. And in business, I always think about that with regards to strategy, is that there's no one wrong way. I remember in my 20s, you log onto Twitter and you see all these Twitter threads of people saying, this is how you build a six-figure business, or this is how you build an agency. But the reality is, the more that I grew my own businesses, the more I realized there's no wrong way to do it. So how do we start plugging that gap with a world of opportunities?
I think number one is it's so important to think about where you want to go. And I mean, that's, we already talked about that, but I'm a big believer in thinking about, okay, not just think about 6 months, a year, 3 years, have a vision what you want to be 10 years from now. This could be yourself. This could be the company that you're working with or the company you want to create. And I think it's so important to have that end vision in mind, because what happens once you have that vision, and I'm not just talking about a one-word vision statement. I'm going beyond that. What does it look? What does it feel? What does it taste like, if you may? And when that future state exists. And what's fun is when you really crush a vision statement, is when you're there in the future and it's like, wow, I actually wrote about this. And it might never be exactly right. It might not be exactly the way how you said it, but you're going to find that your subconscious mind starts working. So then the next big thing, after you figured out your compass and the direction where you're going, you have to set aspiring goals. And the reason for that, I alluded to this earlier, is that if you just set basic goals, I'm going to improve 5 or 10%. It doesn't force you to change your habits. To really have an incremental, substantial change is you have to push yourself, strive to do something extraordinary. And it's okay if you miss that and just slightly get below it, or even perhaps substantially below, but you're going to be way above that 5 to 10% improvement. That then new success is going to bring you confidence, right? That you can actually change and do things. And then after you get towards that aspiring part. So Brian, let me stop there. But any questions, thoughts about setting aspiring goals?
Yeah, no, I actually like that. And I want you to continue here. I just want to echo for listeners, one thing that I'm hearing from what you're sharing with us is what got you here won't get you there. And that's why you're really talking about not just improving or setting goals based on your current state. You're saying, hey, let's break the system. Let's change the nature of how we're operating to reach that new level. So I love it, Carl. Let's keep going here.
Absolutely. So after you move forward with the next piece, it's the plan part, the strategic plan. That is literally how you're going to get there. We mentioned that earlier, right? The strategies from how you get from A to B. Now, if you are more than just yourself, just a single solo entrepreneur, and you have multiple people you're working with, what's really important about this next part is you get them included in that process. You want to facilitate, or you want to get help with somebody else to help facilitate that process. Because if you don't get buy-in from your team, Gallup tells us studies of 51% of your managers will actually actively try to stop you from completing. And the why is, once again, they're focused on getting their job that you're paying them to do. So we want to get buy-in, ideally give them some incentive or some concept, or at least where they're like, hey, this is mine. They own that. Then the next part is, Brian, I'm sure you've been a part of strategic planning processes, but I have a whiteboard. I've got 2 whiteboards, one in front of me, one to the side of me, and I love writing things down and coming up with ideas. And this is no problem of most entrepreneurs. We have tons of ideas. But the next stage is to trim down the essential few. There's a book, well, actually it's not behind me at the moment, but it's called The 4 Disciplines of Execution. And what they found after doing 1,500 strategic implementations, that people should only focus on 3 strategic initiatives at one time. But what was interesting is they wrote the book again. They updated it after doing nearly 5,000 implementations. And they said only focus on one thing at a time. And what you find is when you focus on one thing in a shorter period of time with high level weekly focus on moving forward the dial, moving forward in a new direction, you could actually get way more done. But if you work on more than 3 at one time, you get nothing done, or you get them done with a really low quality. And the next piece is a funny one, is you actually have to start. You hear about the concept of strategic plans never moving forward, never actually having a particular area. That is one of my biggest frustrating. We actually have done studies that only 20% of organizations actually start their strategic plan. A lot of this comes from fear. They're afraid, right? It's interesting. McKinsey, who's one of the people paying them $500,000 and more just to start talking with them to do strategic plan implementations, only 20% of theirs actually get completed. Think about that. But nobody ever got fired from hiring McKinsey. Well, you might work with other entrepreneurs, other people, only 10% of organizations get 2/3 of their objectives done. So what we do is give them confidence, and how you get that confidence to help them figure out the details week to week, month to month, quarter to quarter, and how they're going to succeed. Once they see that success, see, what's scary is jumping and getting away from the dock. You kind of get a metaphor of like you moving away and you're getting to this new destination. The other part behind the new destination on that journey you're on to get to where you're trying to go is there's going to be a point where you don't know where you're at. Literally behind you is scary, and in front of you, you can't see the destination yet. So we have to focus on what we call the leading indicators, not just the lagging indicators. This is part of the process. Well, it's how you're going to measure along the way what's actually happening and taking place. Once you see those indicators, that's going to give you confidence. An example of an indicator is people will, let's say they have a sales goal. They want to double in sales. That's fine. Okay, I have no problem with somebody saying, well, we want to double in sales over a 2 or 3 year period of time, whatever it is for their company size. Okay, you've done that. But what matters is what you're doing, once again, the habits, day to day, week to week, month to month, what's really changing things. That could be an example of we need to do demos with our clients because we need to show the product to get them to see. If we don't get a demo, we're not going to get there. We need to call the client to actually get them to the demo. Those are the leading indicators. Amazon has shown that that's where they really have crushed people, is that they focus not on the outcomes as much as they do focus on the leading indicators to get to the result. And then you have a 3x return on that alone, just by focusing on leading indicators versus the lagging indicators. And then finally is navigate, because, Brian, you think about what happened just recently, like with COVID. I think everybody remembers that. There were so many strategic plans just died. And what happened was they were doing whatever they could to survive. But you have to have your plans to be able to navigate, to understand that things are going to take place that you don't expect. And then how you're going to adapt your strategic plan to still get to the destination that you're expecting to arrive at.
Carl, what an overview. I'm going to call a few things out for listeners right now because chances are they're on the go, they're at the gym, they're driving as they're listening to us. So listeners, Carl just went over a lot of stuff right there, but I want to reveal to you, I have an advantage because obviously I can see Carl. I'm on his website as well, so I can see all of this visually laid out. That is his CAPTAIN methodology. So CAPTAIN being the acronym for all of those steps that he just walked us through. So go back, re-listen to it, but also on his website, which is 40strategy.com, 40strategy.com. Obviously, we'll plug the link at the end of this episode, but you can see this entire framework laid out in front of you. And Carl, a few things that I really want to call out here is that I love the fact that you end that on navigate. Is on the fact that, you write it right on your website. A strategic plan is a hypothesis, not a fact. There's so many times in our entrepreneurial journeys where we have a detour. It's kind of like, I love the map analogy, or in your case, the boating analogy, where you know where you want to go, but there could be things in the way. There could be a storm in the way. It doesn't mean you quit your journey. It means you go around it. So I love that. The other thing I really want to call out is the A for act. And you guys heard Carl reveal to us 20%. Carl, is that the number you gave us? 20% of strategic plans? That's crazy. Right. And it's something we can all relate to. Carl, I chuckled because you're surrounded by whiteboards. Right beyond my camera, I also have a whiteboard hanging on the wall. And you're right. How many things do we all write down? Listeners, you are not alone in this. Carl's seen it from businesses at $0 to $40 million. Heck, billion-dollar companies don't take action on that. So this is the important stuff that I really want to call out. And the final thing that I really want to call out from the overview that you just gave us is those leading indicators. I always use weight loss as an example there because it's so easy to visualize. If you eat healthy today and you step on the scale tomorrow, you're still going to be the same weight. It doesn't mean that your actions or habits aren't working. It just means that it's a leading indicator. What you intake nutritionally today is a leading indicator for what your results are going to be a week from now, a month from now, a year from now. So Carl, so much good stuff just in that overview. I want to go a little bit deeper into some of these aspects, particularly like the leading indicators is something that I think a lot of people struggle with, because here's my hypothesis, Carl, and feel free to disagree with it or chime in from your own perspective, is I always argue that the reason why most entrepreneurs quit isn't because their business isn't going to work or their strategic plan isn't going to work. It's because they don't get results fast enough. Everybody wants instant gratification. So I argue that we need to do something to get results quicker, some sort of results. And one way to do that is to change the results that we're looking for. Talk to us about your perspective of some of those key leading indicators. Use sales as an example, that you think strategically these should be the things that we optimize for because the rest takes care of itself.
Yeah, I'm going to try to punctuate this with one more example, and then we'll get into it. One strategy could be to grow your business is I'm going to hire a salesperson. And we need to hire the salesperson because the salesperson is going to be the difference, because I'm trying to do everything myself. This is a classic entrepreneur problem, right? I'm trying to be all things, and perhaps my background is not a salesperson, so I'm going to hire this third. So we're saying to grow this upcoming year 50%, we're going to hire a salesperson. Well, Brian, you and I know if you're actually trying to hire a great, extraordinary hunter salesperson, not a farmer, a hunter, that could take you up to 3 to 6 months. And then, Brian, let me ask you a question. How long do you think does it take for a salesperson to get up to speed?
Yeah, at least 1 or 2 quarters.
At least. And the data even says it can take up to 2 to 3 years for a salesperson to get full speed. So think about that for a minute. You have a 1-year plan to grow 50%. Your strategy to grow that this year's 50% is to hire this one salesperson. The fact is, the most likely thing is, they're not going to provide significant organic incremental sales until the next year. So that strategy isn't a bad strategy. That strategy is a leading indicator. Hiring that salesperson is going to help year 2. So that's part of that long-term perspective people have, is that often, once again, you mentioned before, Brian, sometimes these leading indicators, these things we're doing, going back to that weight example, is not going to help you out tomorrow. But I tell you what, I've been on St. Jude's had a thing of doing 3,000 push-ups in a month. And so I joined the program with it. But I had actually already been doing push-ups for a while. And matter of fact, it started as this incremental, do the amount of push-ups like that's in the day of the calendar of the month, and 15. And then I eventually got to 30, and then I kept on going to 60, and I got to 100, and got to where actually I was at the pace of already about 280 a day. So joining into this 3,000 per month was almost kind of easy. So I ended up doing 10,000 during a 24-month period. Now, I ended up being a little harder, doing 500 a day. The point is, I was leading every single day. I was doing 25 reps every 2 minutes for a certain period of time. And those leading indicators, those push-ups, gave me the stamina, the strength to be able to easily move up my long-term targets to hit that longer-term goal of getting 3,000, of course, blowing away to 10,000 per month. And all this was for charitable purposes, by the way, why we're doing that. But that's that example of doing the leading versus the lagging. Other type things that you can do from the sales perspective is prospecting, right? Prospecting is one of the most important things. Who are you trying to focus on? So sometimes people will this is a non-strategic sales technique, is people we're just going to start going on LinkedIn and find anybody you want to know. Well, who are you really trying to look for? And are you focusing on exactly the few who are going to buy your product or service? And then how often are you reaching out to them each day with the right message? It's amazing how many times they're like, oh, I wanted my sales to grow, but we're not doing those daily prospecting contacts to get a prospect to be a potential lead, and that lead potentially to turn an opportunity. And that opportunity to turn in ultimately to a sales proposal. That sales proposal to ultimately turn into a deal, depending on what you sell in the marketplace. So those stages, working on each of them respectively and tracking them and being accountable and talking with them on a regular basis, those are such critical leading indicators that really make such a huge impact on the outcome of where you're trying to get towards.
Yeah, Carl, I don't know if this is encouraging or discouraging for listeners, because the message that I'm hearing, and I think it's a very important and powerful one, and I think the right entrepreneurs are going to hear this and say, today's the day. Like, something needs to change in my life and in my business, because the message that I'm hearing, Carl, and it's one that I've long embraced, especially as I've matured as a person, as an entrepreneur. Now I'm wise and in my 30s. But the thing that I've really learned is that your results today are not the results of what you did yesterday or even last week. The results we're getting this year in 2023, for most of us, it's a result of what we did in 2022. And our results that we're going to get in 2024 and beyond are going to be the results of what we're doing today, every single day. And that's what I love about your approach. And that's why I think it especially illuminates it. And this is where I want to say that potentially it's a little discouraging, is for people sitting there saying, well, gosh, I'm operating without a strategy. I've never actually sat down and written out and then taken action on a strategy. So I'm essentially starting from zero today. And a lot of people probably will be feeling that way from a strategy perspective. What does that even look like, Carl? Because it's easy for us to sit here on a podcast episode and have a conversation and say, yeah, you need a strategy. What does it actually look like in practice? You gave us that methodology, and obviously we can take action on each of those. It's why I love your framework. It's actionable. Every step of it is actionable. But where does it start? Does it start with us sitting down with an external board of advisors? Does it start with us just sitting down, pen and paper ourselves? How do we do it?
Yeah, if you don't have strategic experience, I encourage you to work with somebody else for the first time. Part of the reason we created this book, well, frankly, you can go to ChatGPT and say, how do we do a strategic plan these days, right? But what's the value is the discernment. And that's still the challenge, and that's where still humans can add additional value and understanding really what your strengths are. But that's part of what Lost at CEO's focus is to help the entrepreneur see and experience. It's frankly having me as the consultant from the book perspective. But what we're doing, there's a lot of different ways of doing this. Once again, and I want to be careful of there's so many different options out there. There's so many great people who do what I do. But it is important to work with somebody to go through those 7-step processes. Where often they fail once again is because they only want to do 1 step or 2 steps. The successful ones, the rigorous approach, and I know that's not the fun thing. It doesn't always fun. I just want to go. I just want to, it's got classic fire, fire, aim, ready type stuff. It's like, if you really plan and go through and then continue to work with trying to get to your end destination. If you notice, I use the term destination, by the way, Brian. I don't use the term, right? So why do you think I use that?
Yeah, because as opposed to goal, for example, because destination is that longer term. For me, I'll be honest, Carl, the reason why I like that you use that is because for me, I'm visual. And so I can picture there's going to be a lot of things between me and a destination, and I'll just kind of have to weave my way around each of them.
That's right. Well, part of the reason I use it is most people in their New Year's resolution goals, I'm not saying all, but the data is pretty bad, right? Between 2 and 10%, get it done. Depends, right? Depends on the data you see, but it's really bad. I mean, you've asked somebody if they are still doing their New Year's resolutions that they set earlier in the year, it's most likely they haven't committed. And forget about even just 45 days later. They haven't continued to work on that part. That's why we use the term destination, because when you get on an airplane, you expect to get to your destination. If you go on a cruise, you expect to get to your destination. That's the mindset we want to have with people, is that you're going to get there, right? And if you go through a rigorous, and it's not crazy rigorous, it's just being focused on your strategic things, not just working in your business every single day, but working on your business, working on these key strategic steps every day, every week, every month, every quarter, incremental steps. And that's where you get these massive improvements, these big things. It's that's the funny part about it, is these incremental massive steps. It's like, how did that happen? Well, it's because you did a bunch of things on every single day, every single month, every single quarter, which got you to that new end result. And that's what's fun. That's part. So one of the things, we do a few different things. We have group settings. We use a captain strategy program. We actually now have group settings, so they don't have to work with me individually. And so entrepreneurs could come in and they walk through with other peers on actually designing the framework, getting to figure out how to actually figure it out and complete it. But I get coached myself, Brian. I've hired 4 to 5 different coaches to help make sure I accelerate what I'm doing. Because It's funny. If you go to play football, which I love that game, you're going to have a coach. If you're going to learn potentially how to swim better, you're probably going to get a coach. But for some reason, when we run a business, most of us don't get a coach. And that's the craziest thing, because this is our livelihood. When you have a manager, you're working for somebody else, you have a manager who is your coach by definition. So I encourage people, if you don't have one, to get one, because it's going to accelerate, right? I'm all about that. How do we get to our destination faster? Mike Michalowicz is one of my favorite authors, is so many people are working on their own as an entrepreneur, and they're kind of, frankly, in poverty. They're always investing. They're always not making real money. They're in the business for themselves, but they haven't figured out how to make profit first. And we have this whole mindset. It's not just about the strategy, but you also have to have a focus on your cash flow, because if you don't, you're just the value you create in the world is based on the value that you're ultimately bringing home. And that's sometimes hurt for people, because I've grown and I even have a multi-million-dollar business. But if you're still making the same that you'd be making as a fast food restaurant manager, why are we doing that? We need to help make sure we're creating real value behind what we're doing things. And that's why we have to stop sometimes. So there's people listening and they're resonating with this, because it's hard being an entrepreneur. Hey, I'm no different, man. I've 7 different businesses I've been with, triple in size, but there's been the ups and downs. Not every single thing has been a wonderful, crazy success. It's as a matter of fact, when I started this company, I had the worst. I've been married for over 25 years with 4 kids, but one of the worst fights I ever had with my wife was opening up this next entrepreneur business. So there's so many things that are working against you in this process, and you have to make sure that you are committed to not only create value in the world, but you're going to allow yourself to bring that value back to you and to the family and to what you're doing. And what we do is we also give. That's what drives us every single day. What drives me every day is we have a goal to positively impact 1 million people, 10,000 organizations, and we are on our way up to giving $1 million over the next decade. And it's awesome. We're on track to do it. And it's the type of stuff that gets me up every single day. But we also make sure we can provide and pay the mortgage, right, and do the basics of what's taking place. Because once again, otherwise, why aren't we working for somebody else if we can't figure it out on our own? And this is what comes down to strategy, right? Strategy, learning the techniques, the different parts of what we want to do. And then you have so much more peace, right, when you're creating value, real value. Brian, you remember right in the middle of COVID, there was somebody on LinkedIn. It was great because we were really fortunate. Our business just kicked off immediately. But none of my clients were in Oregon. And so I had to start traveling around. I couldn't travel during that period of time. And so I already mentioned we give the first 10% of our charity. Well, I was giving out more in May than I was making, which tells me I had a 90% drop in revenue in that moment. But we took a moment and just sat down and said, we're not going to stop. And so we actively, and I made decisions of I'm going to still actively find ways to still be present. So we did that. And because I was willing to actually travel around while most people were afraid, I was able to grow the business, and we've doubled every year since then. Those are the decisions, the risks, the tactics, the strategies, and the motivation of when you're trying to create value in the world, you're willing to do the things you need to do to help make it. And that's what drives me every single day, is not only to what we want to do, but to help others fulfill their dreams and get to where they want to go. Because that's what's fun when we can, the book is all about, this book is about my story and the entrepreneurs I work with, but it's also along the side, there's this wisdom of, man, I wish I knew this information 5, 10, 15 years ago, because it would have been so much more effective, so much more faster if I wrote down the goals and actually focused on getting that done.
Yeah, Carl, so much to unpack there. I'm going to be very open and transparent with you here in this segment because there's so much to unpack. At the top of this episode, when I told listeners that this is an episode that I had circled on my calendar, I'll tell you exactly why, Carl. It's because I knew that over the course of our conversation today, you were going to be making so many of our listeners extraordinarily uncomfortable. And I'm going to tell you why I feel that way, because I think it's right in the title of your book, to be honest. And there's something about the title of your book that deeply resonates with me that I want to talk about next. And that is, for so many of our listeners, hearing these big, deep, important topics that you're talking about right now, understanding how to put profit first. And I'm a big fan of Mike Michalowicz's work as well. Love the book Profit First. For people who haven't listened to that, that is his main book. So definitely recommend that. It's clearly had an impact on both Carl and I. But you're talking about being profitable. You're talking about getting out of poverty, that hamster wheel that so many entrepreneurs are on, which leads me to the third biggest thing that I think is going to make listeners uncomfortable about this conversation, and why I want to bring in your book title is because, Carl, somewhere along the way, I think we lost sight of the term entrepreneur. I think it became so overused that it became this kind of weirdly mainstream, I don't know what we did to that term, but everyone's an entrepreneur now. Go on Twitter, go on LinkedIn, everyone's tagline says entrepreneur. And that's why I think in an entrepreneurial world where we glorify anyone who says they're an entrepreneur, even if they're making no money, by the way, I think the important thing is real entrepreneurs think like CEOs, act like CEOs. And that's why I love the title of your book, Lost at CEO. It's easy to be an entrepreneur in today's society because it's such a loose term that there is no definition. There's no real way that we need to be as entrepreneurs. Anyone can put it in their bio and boom, they're an entrepreneur if they say they are on social media. But the stuff that you're talking about here is uncomfortable because it's thinking like a CEO. It's thinking like a business leader. It's thinking like someone who has to support a family with 4 kids, who has to bring on employees at certain points. Regardless of where you are in your entrepreneurial journey, it's things that we all have to turn to. And that, to me, Carl, is why I love so much of this that you're talking to us about. Talk to us about that difference from your perspective. I'd love to get your vantage point on this difference between entrepreneur and CEO, because for sure those two terms are different today.
Yeah, they really are. And I really appreciate your discussion of that concept of, anybody can throw on entrepreneur, and technically anybody could say they're a CEO, right? They could throw that on, but that's core. It's entrepreneur to me says you're willing to take a risk and try something out to help provide for yourself, provide for your family, perhaps provide for a greater good. But a CEO is different. A CEO is saying that I am responsible for the organization to be successful, not just myself. And I think that's a big designation difference. And even if you are a solopreneur, when you start thinking you're a CEO of your organization, and a minimum, even if you have contract employees that are scattered all throughout the world, if you start thinking about, hey, our goal here is to help make sure that we're serving our clients to the best of their ability. And we're going to make, and having this, again, Good to Great, whose book is in behind by Jim Collins, a classic. If you haven't read that book, I highly recommend, even if you're a small business entrepreneur. The concept of you want to be a servant-based leader on making sure that everything else is happening is more important than yourself. And when you start thinking about, once again, adding value, making the differences, that's, to me, is when you really become a CEO. Now, don't get me wrong. There are CEOs that are we all seen the headlines, right, of the ones who we don't want to be. And that's why entrepreneur, I think, has this kind of romanticism. Oh, I'm an entrepreneur and everything's great. But often, honestly, an entrepreneur to me means that you haven't made it yet. Right? You haven't actually got necessarily to the next level. It just means you're a risk taker. Like, have you actually created a business and been able to sell it? Or have you actually been able to create business that you're able to put money, significant money, into your retirement? Or have you been able to have it fund your children's education? Or have you been able to actually take off 2 weeks and not worry about your business? Right? That's when we start becoming a CEO. When we start having the flexibility, the challenge. And once again, it doesn't almost matter what size your business. I was just recently talking to somebody who had read the book They were actually a departmental manager at a company. This is a friend who told me about somebody else who read the book. They've been working crazy hours, and they called up my friend at 9 p.m. and they said, "Oh man, my relationships around everybody I'm with is broken because I'm working way too much, and I need to focus on everything that's taking place." Like these hard things, right? Because hey, Brian, let's just talk the facts here. I've been at too many funerals in my life, unfortunately. Nobody cares that you're an entrepreneur when you're dead. What they care about is the impact that you've had on people. Why people show up is because of the relationships that you have and how you've made a difference in the world. And so when you have that responsibility of being a CEO, not just an entrepreneur, then you really start thinking about, hey, how am I making a difference in the world? How am I going to do these things that really, really matter? So when we talk about this strategic plan, you also should have really a strategic plan for your own life, right? This book, by the way, is the first of three. And the first one's about this kind of first step in the process. And the next book is going to be about getting to the next stage. But the third stage is going to be about, Brian, I can't tell you how many people I know who now have made it. Okay, so I have a whole other set of contacts and human beings that never have to work a day again in their life, but then they think they're going to retire and quit at whatever age, 35, 45, 55. And they go nuts and they're about to put a pencil in a retina if they play another game of golf, because that's not how they were built to change, make a difference in the world. So you have to think about that next stage too, of how you're going to make a difference then. We have the Measure Success podcast, and we talk with people how their success of getting towards success in their business and their personal life. And then it's so fascinating. There's like this big divide for those who have made it and those who are trying to quote unquote make it. And you could tell and hear in the responses the difference. And our goal is to figure that out before you even have it, because then you're going to have the end in mind. This is why I'm such a big fan of the vision. Have the end in mind and start acting like that today. And when you start acting like that today, all of a sudden those fears and those concerns of what you're having, because you know you're actually heading in the right direction, and that people are going to show up at the end of the day because you are making a difference in the world with your people, your employees, your family, et cetera, whoever it is, your significant others. That's when you have this peace. That's when it's just awesome. Because I don't know about you, Brian, but when my significant others, when things aren't going well, things are not good, right? That stuff matters to me more than anything. And when they're together, they're at peace, then I could even have the ability to even make, once again, continuing on this great difference we can make on it. So, Brian, yeah, this is big stuff. I mean, that's why, and I appreciate you asking the questions on a deeper level. It's so important that it's more than just the business. It's about how you're making an impact in the world. And when you do that and you go there and you do the right direction, what I've found is you even do greater. You have a greater difference. You actually make more money to do the things you want to do to contribute and make a difference in the world. And that's what brings us joy.
Woof, Carl, I'm not going to lie to you. In 620-ish, however many episodes we are into this podcast, that right there is one of my favorite answers to any conversation we've ever had here on air. I think that is such an important distinction. I'm so grateful that we went there in our conversation here today, because it is, I mean, so many aspects of just that one answer, talking about death, legacy, talking about the responsibilities of a CEO versus an entrepreneur. You also, I think you cut right to the heart of it, of why we've glorified the term entrepreneur in society, because you're right. The thing that it signifies is risk taker, question asker. Those are things that are admirable. It's why I love the entrepreneurial spirit. Carl, it's why you love the entrepreneurial spirit. Every CEO has that entrepreneurial spirit, but the reverse isn't true. Not every entrepreneur is willing to take those responsibilities, is willing to tackle these big strategic things that leave an impact, that leave a legacy. And I think that is really the aspiration that we all need to take on if we're serious about doing this stuff. It's funny, here on the Wantrepreneur to Entrepreneur podcast, part of me is just like, these are all stepping stones. What we're really talking about is Wantrepreneur to CEO. And I love the fact that you've introduced us to that topic. So, Gosh, Carl, so much that we went into today. I knew that no matter how long we talked today, we would only scratch the tip of the iceberg, which is why I'm so grateful that you have a book, that you have a podcast, that you have so much more. But before I ask you to plug those things for listeners, I really want to give you the difficult task today, and that is to tie up a pretty little bow for listeners. Because I know that listeners, the one word, I never use this word, Carl. This is just on the fly. Listeners are going to be shook today. They are going to be sitting there saying, gosh, is everything I'm doing, it's not enough. It's not strategic enough. It's not intentional enough. I need to change the way that I'm operating, which is a huge wake-up call for all of us. So I love that you shook them. But now that you've shaken them, Carl, what's the action that you think they should take? What's something they can do to go from being shook to being on the right path and creating that strategic plan? What's that one action?
Stop and think. I want every listener that's listening to this, I want them to stop and think, and I want them to, whatever you need to do, whether you're going to a local coffee shop or you're going to pull over on the side of the road and go to a park, or you're going to okay, this weekend I'm going to book a weekend next weekend. I want you to stop and to think why. Why do I exist? Why does my business exist? And I really want you to start thinking about that future, that vision. And then from there, after you've got that crystallized, then you start working to get in there every single day. And so what I want to challenge everyone who's listening today is stop doing just to do, start doing with a purpose. And that's going to just create energy and success with you. And I just can't wait to hear, Brian, the people who are going back to you and saying that this podcast was a difference for them on knowing I'm going to stop being busy. I'm going to stop just hustling. I'm going to start actually navigating my strategy with a purpose.
Amen to that. It's also going to start bringing all of you momentum. This is the key stuff. Carl, you hit the nail on the head. When listeners reach out to me, the thing that I really love when they reach out is, which, by the way, listeners, you know how to get a hold of me via email. Don't be shy. I love hearing from so many of you. But I always love hearing where they say, it was this one episode that made me take these decisions differently. And the trickle-down effects, the rippling effects of all of those decisions are incredible. So hopefully this one episode is that for so many of you. So listeners, I want to hear from you. Carl wants to hear from you, which sets the stage. Carl, I want you totally brag on us a little. Tell us all the places that listeners should go to learn more about you, the awesome work that you're doing. Tell us about your book. Take it away.
Awesome. So thank you so much, Brian. It's been a real privilege to be on today. So there's a ton of different ways to connect with us. The easy thing is just go to 40strategy.com, 40strategy.com. There you can find all the information about what's happening. But I'll give you a couple of different things. One is I encourage you to, I appreciate, Brian, how often you brought a book. Lost at CEO. We had number one Amazon bestseller in 12 different categories at our launch. We just launched very recently, and I encourage you to pick it up. If you get a chance, do an Amazon review. This is just your listeners, Brian. I do not offer this to anybody. And I'm only going to offer this for the next 90 days. Okay, so not forever. But if they want to send me an email directly at Carl J Cox at 40strategy.com, I'll actually send you a free copy. Okay, a signed copy of the book. So that's not something I normally do. It's going to cost me some sales, but I want to make sure that these lessons can get towards you. So that's something that, once again, just email Carl J Cox at 40strategy.com. You can find me on LinkedIn. We're pretty active on there. And we have the Measure Success podcast as well, which we have a weekly podcast, comes out every Tuesday, where we talk with top leaders about effective strategies that inspire success with authors, CEOs, entrepreneurs, and the crazy high achievers in the world. So with that, you have the contact information. Love to hear you. Brian, I'm hoping you could forward somebody else who says, wow, this podcast really made a difference. But we want to just make sure we're giving. That's a part of what we're trying to do, is just help give and make a difference. And that's what gets me fired up, right? We're trying to positively impact 1 million people in 10,000 organizations over the next decade. And so hearing your responses, that gives us the energy to keep moving forward and do this every single day.
Yes, I so appreciate that generous offer, Carl. Listeners, you all know how much I adore when guests come on and are so generous with their availability to you listeners. And what Carl just said, you have no idea how much it means to content creators, to people who are putting ourselves out there to really hear from you. And Carl, I'm sure you can relate to this as well. Listeners would be shocked at how few people take us up on these things. So you will stand out if you're one of the few who says, you know what, I'm going to start moving forward and making connections and putting myself out there to connect with high achievers, because we are the average of the 5 people we spend the most time with. You want people like Carl in your corner that's an incredible offer to send a personalized, handwritten, signed copy of your book. I love that, Carl. Thank you so much. So listeners, you all know the drill. We're going to be linking to Carl's business website, which is at 40strategy.com. That's 40strategy.com. You can find the links as well to his book on Amazon. You can find a link to his podcast as well, his LinkedIn. All of those links are down below. Otherwise, Carl, this has been deeply impactful. I know I'm speaking on behalf of so many listeners. So thank you so much for joining us today on the Wantrepreneur to Entrepreneur podcast.
Thank you, Brian. It's been an absolute pleasure to be on the podcast today.